Welcome to the Darkling Radio, where ordinary nights turn into nightmares, and every story drags you deeper into the dark. Sit back, turn off the lights, and listen if you dare. Jason Holloway thought his 21st birthday would be unforgettable, but not like this. What began as a night of celebration twisted into something far darker, when the candles on his cake refused to die out, and the smiling faces around him began to change into something he no longer recognized. I'd never been the kind of person who cared much about birthdays most years. I let the day pass without notice, sometimes without even telling anyone it was coming. But this year, my friends insisted on celebrating, and against my usual instincts, I agreed. I told myself it would be simple, just a cake, a few decorations, and an evening of ordinary laughter. Yet from the moment I opened my eyes that morning, something felt strangely wrong, like the day itself was out of balance. The air in my room was heavy, colder than it should have been for late summer. The ceiling seemed lower, shadows stretched longer, and there was a faint hum in the walls, like a hidden current running through the house. When I reached for my phone, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The screen displayed the wrong date. Instead of showing today, my birthday, it had frozen on yesterday's date. I checked the time, tapped the screen, even restarted it, but it refused to change, as though time itself had chosen to stand still. My chest tightened, but I pushed the thought away, blaming a software glitch. Even so, I couldn't shake the unease that clung to me like a film I couldn't wash off. The day dragged forward with a strange sluggishness, each hour dripping into the next like molasses. I found myself staring at the clock, unable to trust it. The ticking sounded uneven, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, like it too was caught in some strange loop. As the sun began to sink and the air darkened, I told myself I just needed to get through the evening, eat the cake and go to bed. That was all, nothing more. By the time my friends arrived, the house was dressed in cheap decorations, streamers clinging to the ceiling corners and balloons sagging against the furniture. They laughed, joked, and carried boxes of food and drinks, their voices filling the space with a forced brightness. For a while it felt almost normal, yet beneath the music and chatter, I felt eyes on me, not from my friends, but from the walls themselves, from the dim corners where the light didn't quite reach. Every time I glanced at the shadows, I thought I saw something shift. When the cake was placed in front of me, my unease only grew worse. The frosting glistened under the light. The candles stood tall, flickering softly, but there was something unnatural about the flame. It didn't sway or dance the way fire usually does. Instead, it stretched upward, long and thin, perfectly still, as if it were reaching toward me rather than burning. I leaned closer, and the smell of smoke was sharper than it should have been. A stinging bitterness in my nose that reminded me more of charred wood than sweet wax. The room suddenly felt heavier, quieter, as if everyone had stopped breathing at once. My chest rose and fell too quickly, and for a brief moment, I wondered if I was about to faint. I forced my eyes to move from the flame to the faces gathered around me, and that was when the true dread struck. Their smiles were gone. Their lips were closed, stiff, unmoving. Their eyes, however, were wide open, shining faintly in the candlelight, too bright, too reflective, like glass marbles catching the fire. The glow wasn't natural. It wasn't the reflection of light in a human eye. It was as if something alive and luminous was staring out from behind their faces. I froze, unable to breathe, unable to move. My mind screamed at me to blink, to look away, but the longer I stared, the more wrong they became. Their heads tilted ever so slightly, in unison, like puppets tugged by the same invisible strings. The flame of the candles reached higher, stretching until it seemed to brush the ceiling. The decorations rustled as if stirred by a wind, though the air in the room was still. I opened my mouth to say something, to break the silence, to demand that this nightmare dissolve into laughter, but my throat locked tight. No sound came. I was trapped in the thick, suffocating moment, heart hammering so violently it hurt. For a second the thought crossed my mind that maybe I hadn't woken up at all. Maybe this was still some kind of dream, one I couldn't pull myself from no matter how hard I tried. And then, as I leaned closer to the cake, the candlelight reflected off their eyes again, brighter this time, unmistakably wrong. It wasn't just light. It was movement. Something was shifting deep inside their gaze, crawling and alive, pressing against the surface of their pupils like hands pushing from the other side of glass. That was when I realized the faces around me weren't my friends at all. I blinked hard, certain my eyes were deceiving me, but when my vision cleared, the room had shifted again. My friends were laughing, clapping, moving as if nothing had happened. Their eyes looked ordinary, their smiles warm, and for a moment I wondered if the dread choking me had only been a trick of the shadows, a stress-born hallucination. But the taste in my mouth told me otherwise. My slice of cake, bright with frosting, felt wrong the instant my teeth sank into it. Instead of sweetness, I tasted something bitter and metallic, like the tang of rust on an old nail. My tongue recoiled and my stomach tightened in protest, yet everyone else chewed happily, oblivious, as if we weren't even eating the same thing. I swallowed hard and excused myself, desperate for air. The hallway seemed narrower than I remembered, the walls leaning toward me as if listening. I reached the bathroom and pushed the door shut behind me. The silence inside was thicker, heavier, like being buried under earth. I turned on the light, but it buzzed faintly, glowing weaker than usual, leaving the corners cloaked in shadow. The mirror was fogged, though I hadn't run the water. Unease prickled down my spine as I wiped my hand across the glass, expecting to see my pale, nervous reflection staring back. Instead, what I saw rooted me in place. My reflection was me, but wrong. My hair looked damp and stringy, my skin a sickly gray, lips stretched in a grin I didn't wear. The eyes were the worst, sunken deep into their sockets, ringed in dark bruises, yet shining with something cruel, almost eager. The reflection tilted its head slowly, watching me with delight. My own head remained stiff, locked in terror. My chest rose and fell in uneven gasps, but the reflection's movements didn't match mine. It was free, moving on its own, grinning wider, wider still, until the corners of its mouth tore unnaturally high into its cheeks. I stumbled backward, colliding with the wall. The thud echoed too loudly in the small room, as though the sound was trapped, bouncing endlessly. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my palms against my face. When I dared to look again, the reflection was ordinary. My tired, shaken self stared back, pale and sweating, nothing more. My knees weakened as I bent over the sink, splashing cold water against my skin. Droplets slid down my face, but even the water felt strange, thick, like it didn't want to cling to me. Forcing myself to return, I opened the bathroom door. The music resumed in the living room, faint laughter spilling into the hallway. Everything seemed to be back in place, yet the shadows stretched across the floor too long, too sharp, like claws dragging silently behind me. My steps felt heavy, almost reluctant, but I pushed forward. When I returned, everyone was exactly where I'd left them, swaying to music, eating cake, chatting as if I hadn't been gone at all, but something in their posture made me uneasy. They were all angled toward me, bodies tilted just enough to suggest their attention had never really left. I tried to calm myself, forcing my lungs to steady their rhythm. Then my eyes fell on the cake. The candles were lit again. I knew I had blown them out. The wax dripped slowly, thicker than it should have been, red like syrup oozing down the sides. The flames glowed brighter than before, too steady, too deliberate, as if feeding on something more than simple air. No one acknowledged it. My friends carried on as though the cake hadn't come back to life on its own. My pulse hammered in my throat, so loud I could hardly hear the music anymore. I tried to convince myself someone had relit them as a joke, but the thought didn't settle. It didn't feel like a prank. It felt like a ritual. I sank into the couch, hoping to steady myself, but the cushions felt damp beneath my hands, as though they had soaked up something spilled long ago. I pulled them away quickly, wiping them against my jeans, and when I looked up again, everyone had stopped moving. The music hadn't cut off, but their bodies were frozen in place. Their faces tilted slightly toward me, unblinking, watching. The candles flickered once, and in the stillness I noticed something I hadn't before. The smoke rising from the wicks wasn't drifting upward, it curled downward instead, spilling over the cake and creeping toward the floor like fingers stretching out to crawl across the carpet. That was when the lights cut out. The darkness swallowed everything at once. The music stopped mid-beat, silenced so abruptly it felt as if sound itself had been torn out of the air. My chest tightened as I froze on the couch, listening for any sign of movement. The silence was suffocating, thick enough that I could hear the faint creak of the house settling, the uneven throb of my own pulse. I waited for my eyes to adjust, but the darkness wasn't natural. It wasn't the kind that gradually gives way to shapes and outlines. It was absolute, pressing, like black fabric pulled over my head. I felt the temperature drop again, a chill biting through my skin, settling deep into my bones. The damp cushion beneath me seemed colder, wetter, and I pulled my hand away in disgust. My breathing sounded too loud, too shallow, echoing faintly as if the room had grown cavernous around me. My heart pounded against my ribs, begging me not to move, but still, my legs twitched with restless terror. Then, slowly, the candles returned. Their glow rose out of the dark one by one, as if unseen hands were lighting them in deliberate rhythm. I counted each flame as it sparked into existence. 1, 2, 3, until they all flickered together, bathing the room in an eerie orange glow. And yet the light felt wrong. It didn't brighten the space, it revealed less. The shadows were thicker, clinging stubbornly to the corners, refusing to give way. My friends stood where they had been, but they were no longer right. Their bodies were stiff, their arms hanging unnaturally straight at their sides. Their faces were pale, drained of warmth, each one wearing the same expressionless mask. Their eyes were wide open, reflecting the flames like polished glass. No blink, no flicker, no breath. It was as though the light itself had hollowed them out. I tried to scream, but my throat was locked tight, only a rasp of air escaping. My body screamed for me to run, yet my legs refused to obey. I was nailed to the couch by fear, every muscle trembling but paralyzed. The sound came then. A slow creak from the front of the house. The doorbell rang, sharp and startling against the suffocating silence. I jerked toward it instinctively, heart skipping. None of my friends reacted. Not a head turned, not a body twitched. The bell rang again, longer this time, as if whoever waited outside was growing impatient. Something compelled me forward, though every instinct begged me to stay put. My steps were shaky, dragging me across the carpet, the candlelight stretching behind me in twisted shadows that clung too closely to my feet. When I reached the door, the house seemed to exhale. My fingers hovered above the knob, and for a moment, I thought I could feel heat radiating through the wood. I opened it. There was no one outside. The night was blacker than I remembered. The porch swallowed whole. No stars, no streetlights, nothing. Just a small box sat neatly in the center of the welcome mat, as though it had always been there, waiting. My name was scratched across the top in uneven strokes, the letters jagged, as if carved rather than written. I bent to pick it up. The cardboard was damp, soft at the edges, the smell of iron clinging to it. My fingers trembled as I carried it back inside, the silence of the house weighing on me heavier than before. When I set it down on the table, the candle flames flared higher, reacting to its presence, their smoke bending unnaturally toward the box. I hesitated, dread screaming at me not to continue, but my hands moved anyway, prying open the lid. Inside lay a single candle. Its wax was not white, not cream, but dark red, like it had been molded from something far thicker than dye. It was already burned halfway down, the wick still faintly smoking, as if it had been snuffed only moments ago. The air grew heavier as I stared at it, the smell of char and rust filling my nose. The laughter returned suddenly, exploding from behind me, though it wasn't human anymore. It was distorted, stretched, layered with something deeper, something that crawled beneath the sound. My body went rigid, and I turned slowly toward the room. My friends were gone. Only their shadows remained, tall and sharp against the walls, standing in their exact places, flickering faintly in the candlelight. The room was wrong. Shadows clung to the walls where my friends had stood, stretched tall and distorted, holding the shape of their bodies but stripped of detail, like cutouts pinned in place. They didn't move, yet I felt them watching. Their jagged edges twitched with the flicker of the candles, bending unnaturally, as though alive in their own way. My chest tightened, every instinct screaming that I was no longer among anything human. The box sat open in front of me, the blood-red candle still faintly smoking. Its presence felt heavy, like a weight pulling at my stomach. The air was suffocating, thick with a smell I couldn't place, burned metallic, and something sour beneath it, like rotting fruit. The walls seemed closer now, the ceiling lower, and the floor beneath my feet felt soft, as though it wasn't solid anymore. My body betrayed me again. My hands lifted the candle from the box, even though I wanted to drop it and run. The wax was warm, almost sticky, clinging to my skin as if it were alive. The shadows along the walls rippled when I held it, bending forward slightly as though bowing toward it. I couldn't stop. My feet carried me back to the cake, my arms placing the candle upright in the center. The flame burst to life instantly, without a match, flaring high with a deep red glow that painted the room in a sickly light. The air grew colder, but the candle's heat pressed against my face. The shadows swelled larger, stretching higher until they reached the ceiling, towering over me. They leaned in close, their edges quivering, and I thought I could hear them breathing. Not one breath, but many, layered together like 100 lungs inhaling around me. I closed my eyes, wishing for it to all vanish, but when I opened them again, the room had changed. The decorations were gone, the furniture gone. I wasn't in my living room anymore. I stood in a small windowless room with peeling wallpaper. The air smelled damp and sour, as though the walls had absorbed years of decay. The cake was still there, resting crookedly on a broken chair, the red candle burning brighter than ever. I spun around, searching for a door, a window, any sign of escape, but there was nothing but endless walls pressing in. My breath quickened, echoing loudly in the silence. The floor beneath me felt uneven, soft in some places, sticky in others, and with every step I worried it might give way. The candle flame crackled faintly, louder than it should have, as if it was feeding hungrily on the air. Then came the sound, a steady drip, drip, drip somewhere in the darkness beyond the candle's glow. At first it was faint, almost easy to ignore, but it grew louder, sharper, each drop hitting the floor with deliberate weight. My eyes strained against the gloom, and that was when I saw it. A dark stain spread slowly across the wallpaper, wetness seeping downward in long streaks. The sound came from there, each drop falling heavy and wet onto the floor. I backed away, my heel catching on something soft. I glanced down and froze. A bundle of balloons lay crumpled at my feet, deflated and shriveled, but slick as though soaked in something wet. I stumbled forward, nearly falling into the chair where the cake sat. The candle flame surged taller, and behind me something shifted. A shadow loomed on the wall. It wasn't mine. It rose higher than the ceiling, distorted and massive, its head brushing against the peeling wallpaper, arms long enough to reach the floor. It moved even though I hadn't, stretching forward, bending toward me. My body shook so hard I thought my knees might collapse, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. The dripping sound quickened, echoing like a heartbeat, louder and louder, until it matched the pounding in my chest. The candle hissed, smoke curling upward in a slow spiral. And then I felt it, A breath, cold and damp, against the back of my neck. The breath against my neck froze me in place. It wasn't imagined, it wasn't subtle. It was cold, damp, and unmistakably real, brushing my skin as though someone stood directly behind me. My body locked, every nerve screaming at once. I wanted to turn, to see what loomed there, but terror pinned me, convinced that whatever waited would devour me if I gave it my eyes. The candle flickered violently, throwing jagged shadows across the room, each one twisting and stretching into grotesque shapes. I forced myself to turn slowly, inch by inch, and the sight that greeted me stopped my breath entirely. It was me. Another version of myself stood there, taller, thinner, with hollow cheeks and eyes that glowed faintly in the red light. The grin on its face was too wide, stretched across its skin as if it had been carved there. Its lips moved in silent words, forming shapes I couldn't understand, whispering without sound, though I swore I could feel the vibration in my skull. It lifted a hand and pointed at the cake. The candle flared brighter, burning with a hiss, the wax running down in thick red streams that pooled on the chair and dripped onto the floor. The drops didn't look like wax anymore. They were darker, heavier, each one landing with a wet smack that spread into sticky puddles. The air grew thicker, almost syrupy, every breath an effort. I staggered backward, my shoulders pressing against the peeling wall. The other version of me didn't move closer, but its shadows stretched farther, crawling across the floor until it touched my feet. The moment it reached me, I felt the ground tremble. The walls groaned. The ceiling cracked faintly as if straining under some invisible weight. The room wasn't stable anymore. It was shifting, tilting, like the whole space was unraveling around me. The laughter returned, faint at first, then louder, circling me from every direction. It wasn't the laughter of my friends anymore. It was layered, distorted, like dozens of voices piled on top of each other, some high and sharp, others deep and guttural. They weren't laughing at something funny. They were laughing at me. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the images didn't vanish. Behind my eyelids, I still saw the candle burning, the red wax pooling like blood. I still saw my other self, lips moving in silent, endless whispers. I still felt the walls breathing, the air pressing down against me like invisible hands. My nails dug into my palms so hard they hurt, but the pain was distant, swallowed by the growing storm in my head. And then, all at once, it stopped. The laughter cut out. The dripping ceased. The candle blew itself out with a hiss, plunging me into total darkness. The silence was worse than the noise. I could hear my heart pounding, the ragged pull of my breath, the faint crackle of something unseen shifting in the dark. My hands groped at the wall, searching for anything to ground me, but the texture was no longer wallpaper. It felt damp, slick, alive, like the skin of something enormous. A faint glow returned, not the candle but my phone. It buzzed in my pocket, vibrating against my leg. With shaking hands I pulled it free and looked at the screen. My stomach twisted. The date was still frozen. Yesterday's date stared back at me, unchanged, unmoving, as though time had been severed completely. My reflection flickered faintly on the black glass of the screen, and when I looked closer, it wasn't me staring back. It was the same hollow-eyed version, grinning wider than ever, lips moving silently in words I couldn't escape. The room shifted again, and suddenly I was back in my living room. The decorations were up, the music was playing. My friends stood around me, laughing, cheering, singing the birthday song as though nothing had happened. The cake sat in front of me, fresh and untouched, all the candles neatly lit, waiting for me to blow them out. For a moment, I wanted to believe it was over, that everything had been a hallucination, a nightmare born of exhaustion and fear. But when my gaze slid to the table, the box was still there, still damp, still marked with my name carved into its lid. And when I glanced back at my phone, the date hadn't changed. It was still yesterday. My birthday had not begun. Or perhaps it never ended. Or worse, maybe I was trapped in it forever. Repeating the same night while something inside the candle waited patiently for me to give it what it wanted. The laughter around me grew louder, sharper, layered again, and I realized my friends weren't singing anymore. They were only watching, smiling, waiting. The candles flickered, shadows leaning toward me, and I knew with a crushing certainty that I would never leave this day alive.